Coming up on Arirang News, South Korea posts more than 400 cases of COVID-19, the most in 6 months. Officials are seriously considering raising social distancing to level 3 or implementing measures close to it. The Bank of Korea downgrades the country's GDP forecast for this year to minus 1.3%. It also decides to hold its key interest rate steady at 0.5%, a record low. And with South Korea's birth rate at an all-time low, the government announces new measures to encourage more people to participate in the economy, especially women and senior citizens. It's 5 p.m. here in Seoul. Thank you for tuning in to Arirang News. I'm Devin Whiting. The number of new cases of COVID-19 in South Korea has soared to more than 400, the highest daily number in nearly 6 months. The National Assembly is also temporarily closed after a reporter tested positive. Kim Yeon-sung has the latest.
South Korea reported 441 new cases of COVID-19 on Thursday, bringing the total number of infections in the country to 18,706. Thursday's 441 new cases marks the highest daily number since March 7th, when the country reported 483 cases. Of the new cases, 434 were local transmissions and only 7 were imported cases. There was one more death, raising the death toll to 313. The number of new cases has been on the rise again this week after briefly dropping below 300 on Monday and Tuesday. The country has now seen 14 days in a row of new cases in the triple digits. Many of the cases reported at the start of the current outbreak were linked to Sarangjeil Church in Seoul and an anti-government rally led by the church's chief pastor on August 15th. The virus has also put the nation's lawmakers under the threat of infection. The National Assembly temporarily closed down on Thursday after a reporter covering the ruling party tested positive for COVID-19 the previous day. The main building, member's office, and press office buildings have all been closed. All 9 committee meetings set for Thursday have also been postponed. Meanwhile, the southwestern city of Gwangju, which had successfully contained its first outbreak last month, is now seeing an uptick in new cases. At least 39 cases have been reported from a church in the city. Infections have also popped up at a table tennis club, office buildings, and daycare centers in Gwangju. South Korean authorities see this week as a last chance to bring the virus back under control. If the situation fails to improve, the government could raise the social distancing level to level 3, the highest in the 3-tier system. Under level 3, South Korea would basically go into a collective shutdown, with gatherings of more than 10 people being prohibited. Kim Yeon-sung, Arirang News.
Typhoon Bavi passed through the Korean peninsula, but it was much weaker than anticipated. The island of Jeju-do suffered the most damage, but the greater Seoul area was relatively unaffected by what was supposed to be one of the worst typhoons ever to hit the country. Our Kim Do-yeon reports.
Typhoon Bavi reached the greater Seoul area early Thursday morning as residents braced for the worst, but the damage was not as bad as expected. There were only a few cases of property damage in the area and power outages in certain districts. The Seoul region was well enough prepared that the places most at risk were relatively safe. A fisherman at a port in Incheon, west of Seoul, says that like the others, he was ready for the worst.
I was on watch duty here from yesterday at 3 p.m., but whether the storm was weak or strong, it was far away, so we didn't take a lot of damage.
The typhoon warning for the greater capital area was downgraded to a strong wind warning as of 9 a.m. Thursday. On the other hand, its impact was much greater hours earlier when it first reached the Korean mainland. In Gwangju and Jeollanam-do province, signboards and streetlights were blown off their posts. Around 100 other cases of damage were reported overnight as well. In Gwangju, thousands of homes lost power. The hardest hit was Jeju, South Korea's southernmost island, which was first to be hit. The outer wall of an apartment building was ripped off and it damaged a car parked nearby. Traffic lights and CCTV cameras were also knocked down by winds of over 108 kilometers an hour. One of Jeju's four main rivers almost reached its 2-meter flood level, forcing nearby residents to leave their homes.
The wind was really strong and the water level rose so fast that the evacuation process was challenging.
Thankfully, there are no reports of any casualties. The storm crossed into North Korea, passing over Pyongyang and then dissipating around Harbin, China. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News, Incheon.
The Bank of Korea has cut its growth outlook for the local economy, forecasting a contraction this year of 1.3%. That's a significant decline from its previous forecast of minus 0.2% back in May. Also, the BOK has decided to keep its key interest rate where it is at a record low. Ji-young has more.
South Korea's central bank has slashed its growth forecast for the local economy this year as it braces for a surge in COVID-19 cases. At the Monetary Policy Board meeting for August on Thursday, the Bank of Korea forecasts the country's economy to shrink 1.3% this year, which is a downward revision from its previous estimate in May of a 0.2% contraction.
When compared to the previous prediction in May, we have lowered the outlook because South Korea's exports have been slower than expected and the country is once again seeing a surge in infections.
The cut also reflected no improvement in private consumption and huge job losses. The bank's governor added that the prediction was based on the premise that the government will maintain the current level 2 social distancing measures. South Korea's economy has only contracted twice before, in 1980 when GDP growth was minus 1.6% and in 1998 when it was negative 5.1%. Despite downgrading its growth outlook, the Bank of Korea on Thursday kept its all-time low interest rate steady at 0.5%. Experts point to the overheated real estate market as a reason not to cut the rate further.
If the interest rate is lowered further, liquidity will surge and there are problems associated with that. For that reason, the central bank is likely to keep the rate at 0.5%.
First Vice Minister of Economy and Finance Kim Yong-bum said volatility in the financial market will be greater than ever depending on the development of the outbreak. He added that the government will prepare thoroughly in case of a prolonged outbreak and will go all out to strengthen the weak links in South Korea's economy. Ji-young, Arirang News.
Time now for an in-depth look at the market news this afternoon, and for that, I'm joined on the line by Dr. Kim Se-won, Professor of Economics at Ewha Women's University. Professor Kim, good afternoon, and thank you for coming on.
Good afternoon, Devin.
Well, the Bank of Korea, as we just heard, has decided to keep its key interest rate where it is at 0.5%. It's also lowered its GDP growth forecast for this year. Tell us about today's meeting at the BOK.
It looks that keeping interest rates steady at 0.5% level would be the only choice for Bank of Korea as of now, because Bank of Korea faces pressure from both interest increase factors and interest decrease factors. The pandemic resurges and real economic activity is still sluggish. So it doesn't allow increase the key interest rate by Bank of Korea. On the other hand, decreasing rate is not feasible either because lower interest rate generates more bubbles in housing market and the possibility of funds outflow from domestic market for smaller interest gap against the United States.
Well, now, Professor, there are concerns about Korea's future economic growth now that total fertility rate has fallen to the lowest level on record. What's your view of this issue?
Yes, this is a really serious problem, David, in the long run. These days, we are stuck in concerns on COVID-19's shock to our society and economy, but real concern in the long run, like in 100 years, is declining population and aging demographic structure. According to Statistics Office of Government, last year's total fertility rate which is the average female's total number of childbirth for life is 0.92. And this is the lowest level between 36 OECD member countries. This situation is particularly serious in rural areas far away from metropolitan area. And if that situation continues, quite a few rural districts will be disappeared in the next century.
Now, switching gears here, we have central bankers, economists from around the world getting ready to meet at Jackson Hole, Wyoming, or they would be, but this year it's going to be held virtually. Jerome Powell, the Fed chairman, to give a highly anticipated speech there. What should we be watching for?
A big attention is paid at Mr. Powell's speech tonight at Jackson Hole meeting because in the meeting he can suggest new Federal Reserve policy target in for continuing his expansionary monetary policy. He can suggest maybe average inflation target, which makes U.S. Federal Reserve implement more aggressive and longer expansionary monetary policy. So if he really pay attention on this new inflation target, that could affect other central banks' monetary policies too.
Yeah, we'll have to talk about that next time once we hear what he says. Now, stocks in New York are up again, and by quite a bit. The S&P and the NASDAQ at new highs. What's the story in the global markets?
There were 5 straight trading day rise in U.S. market until yesterday. These positive returns are mostly due to high-tech stocks' great performances. Dow Jones Industrial had 0.3% return, and NASDAQ had 1.7% return yesterday. Along with U.S. market, Euro markets in London, Paris, and Frankfurt also had positive returns, but Asian markets had negative returns today in Tokyo and Hong Kong. As market participants are maintaining a wait-and-see attitude before Fed Chairman Powell's speech at Jackson Hole meeting.
It seems that was the case here in Korea today, too. The Kospi and the Kosdaq both lower. Is that the fear of the lockdown in Korea, or what was driving that trade?
Domestic market decreased for today in both Kospi and Kosdaq markets. Rising concerns on pandemic resurgence these days has blocked U.S. market's positive impact on domestic market. Kospi had negative 1.1% return, and Kosdaq had negative 0.6% return today. In both markets, as usual, domestic individual investors bought stocks, but foreign investors and domestic institutional investors sold stocks.
All right, Professor, we'll have to leave it there for today. Thanks so much for coming on. We'll talk again soon.
Thank you very much.
Now, South Korea has announced new plans to respond economically to the shrinking of the country's population. It'll encourage more people like senior citizens and women to join the workforce by providing incentives and making maternity leave more flexible. Kim Sung-min reports.
South Korea aims to expand the economic participation of women, young people, and the elderly to deal with the continuous decline in population. Meeting with economy-related ministers on Thursday, Finance Minister Hong Nam-gi said South Korea's total fertility rate for the second quarter fell to its lowest ever at 0.84 and stressed the need for more government measures.
The changes in population could lead to a decline in economic growth while increasing the burden of supporting the elderly. This could pose a great threat to the economy and society as a whole, so the government measures are not an option, but a matter of survival.
To encourage more women in the workplace, maternity leave has become more flexible. Women will be allowed to split their maternity leave into several blocks, and to support this, firms that provide the leave or allow shortened work hours will receive incentives. The government also aims to provide job support for young people and find those that have given up looking for jobs. As for the elderly, the government will discuss policies to keep them in the workplace for longer. Employment data for the 65 to 69 age group will be monitored and released to the public. The age standard for special treatment of seniors, such as discounts, will also be raised from the current 65 to around 70. To provide a skilled workforce for small and medium-sized businesses, more foreign workers will be allowed to hold dual citizenship. Also, some foreign students who majored in natural sciences and engineering will be eligible to work in the country. In addition to these measures, the government will also try to amplify the productivity of individual workers by expanding lifelong education opportunities as well as short-term and long-term job training. 김성민, Arirang News.
And that brings us to the end of this newscast. Thank you for watching. More live news coming your way at 7 p.m. Korea time.